This is Coach Carly with BTY. Hip mobility is important for improving sports performance and decreasing your risk for injury. That ability to load and drive through your hips is what is going to allow you to produce speed and power. So better movement through the hips is going to lead to better performance in your sport. However, if you don't have the necessary range of motion to get in that proper hip position, your body is going to try to find that movement from somewhere else in the body, which can lead to injury. Two of the main areas that tend to try to pick up the slack when hips aren't doing their job are the low back and the knees. So if you're having pain in your low back or knees, I'd be curious about what's going on at the hip, because that might give you insight into why that pain is popping up in the first place. Now there's a question of how much mobility is enough mobility. And the answer is, it depends on the activity that you want to do. There's a certain amount of mobility that's necessary for all humans just to walk around and live without pain. However, if you play a sport that demands a little more extreme range of motion through the hips, you better have access to that range of motion, and you better be able to control that range of motion. When we're talking about the movement of the hips, there are four main actions that the hip does. There's a couple other ones, but they're related to these four. So the hip flexes, the hip extends, the hip internally rotates, and the hip externally rotates. So I'm going to show you four of my favorite exercises to improve these hip actions. When we talk about mobility, there is passive mobility and active mobility. And just like they sound, passive mobility is how big of a range of motion you can take a joint through passively. Active mobility is how big of a range of motion you can take a joint through actively. So we are much more interested in active mobility than passive mobility. If you have a crazy large amount of mobility that you can kind of passively take your joints through, but you can't control that range of motion, you can't use that range of motion in a powerful or fast or strong expression. It's not going to help you in your sport. But more importantly, that discrepancy between how far you can passively take the joint and how far you can actively control that is going to leave you open to injury. So we want to improve that passive mobility, but alongside of that, we want to make sure we're improving the active control and stability as well. So this next exercise is going to work on that active mobility. These are called hip cars, and they're going to work in all four of those actions that I talked about: flexion, extension, internal rotation, and external rotation, but we want to really make sure we own and control each of those movements. So it helps to put something on your back to keep you honest. So with this exercise, your low back tends to want to take over and try to help out, so we don't want that to happen. We want all this movement just coming through the hips. So you're going to start on your hands and knees. You're going to put this cone right on your back, and we're going to make a circle with your hips. So nice and slow, you want to feel like you're trying to move that leg through mud. You're going to start by kicking up. Keep that foot where it is and start rotating that knee open to the sky. Pull that knee up towards your shoulder, and then all the way around and down. So as you do this, you should improve and increase that range of motion, but we want to make sure we're improving that control along with it. So after you do a few in that direction, you can reverse directions, and we'll do the same thing. So you're going to flex that hip up here, bring that knee up to your chest, bring that knee to the sky, rotate that foot to the sky, kick up, around, and down. So again, the rules are, make sure you're moving nice and slow so you're building that control in as well. You're not just whipping the leg around. And make sure you're not taking it into any pain. So if there's pain at the end range of a movement, you don't want to take it into that. So let's say, for example, as I come to the outside here, right there I feel pain, I'm going to keep it shallow at that. I'm going to stop right about here, bring it up and around, and as I improve the pain-free motion, I'm going to increase that pain-free motion more and more and more so that I can eventually get to that position where it used to hurt without it hurting. With this exercise, we're going to work on improving external rotation through the front hip and internal rotation through the back hip. So we want to get in a 90-90 position here to start with. 90 degrees through the front leg, 90 degrees through the back leg. You want to try to get this shin and this knee as parallel to each other as possible. What we're going to do here is we're going to find the end range of this stretch, and then we want to strengthen up around it. So we'll start with the front leg. I want you to rotate and lean your belly button over this front knee, and you should feel a stretch to the outside of this hip and maybe a little bit through the inside of the thigh. You can support yourself with your hands here, but once you find that end range stretch, again, pain-free, but you should feel a pretty good stretch here, you want to start creating tension. So we're going to start by pushing this shin down through the ground to start with. So I want to feel like I'm trying to make a dent through the ground here. I'm pushing as hard as I can. I should feel some extra muscles activating as I do that. And then I'm going to reverse it. So I want to feel like I'm trying to lift this ankle, this whole shin off of the ground. But as I pull up here, I want to feel like this shin is stuck in concrete. So I'm trying to pull up, but instead of that leg actually lifting, I'm pulling myself actively deeper into that stretch. I'm going to stay here. This is my new starting point. I'm going to push down again, push as hard as I can, and then try to pull up with that leg. And again, as I pull up, I'm pulling myself deeper and deeper into this stretch. So notice as I'm going into this stretch, I'm still keeping a long line through my spine. What I see sometimes on this is people, as they start to go down here, they just kind of collapse. And so that's not creating range of motion through the hip, that's creating more range of motion through the back. So I want to keep that long line and feel like everything's moving together. You're pulling belly button down to the knee instead of chest and head down to the knee. So with the back leg, it's the same thing. You're going to rotate towards that back leg. And again, I'd start by supporting with your hands. You can go through the front here, you can go through the back, wherever you feel the most stretch with support and control. And we're going to do the same thing with this leg. So I want you to feel like you're pushing this shin down through the ground, like you're trying to make a dent through the ground. And then you're going to feel like you're trying to lift this shin and ankle off the ground as you side bend your shoulder down towards the ankle. So you'll feel a little side crunch sensation here. You might get a little cramping through this hip, and that's okay. It's just telling you that you don't have control in this range of motion, and that's the main thing we're trying to do here, is build that active control through the stretch. So after that, you're going to push again, pull yourself deeper into that stretch, push and pull. After you do both sides, you're going to switch and do the same thing on the other side. This exercise is focused on improving hip extension. This is a hip flexor stretch. You've probably done a hip flexor stretch in the past, but our focus might be a little bit different than what you've done before. So what I see a lot of times in a hip flexor stretch is people lean way forward like this, which you feel a big stretch through the front here, but it doesn't teach the hip how to function properly. And so usually what's going to happen in that scenario is that hip's going to go right back to being tight. Now the reason that hip's tight many times in the first place is because the hip's out of alignment. The hips are tilted forward, rib cage is flared up, and so that hip flexor has to do a lot more work because the core and the glutes can't fire very effectively in this position, so the hip has to take over and work harder. And so we can keep stretching that, but if that continuously has to keep working harder to make up for the core and glutes, it's gonna keep getting tight. So what we want instead is to realign those hips. So what I want to think about here is that rib cage and the hips, I want those stacked right on top of each other. So the thought here is hips kind of scoop underneath. So there's a couple ways of thinking about that. So if you think about that front hip bone coming up towards the rib cage, or that back hip pocket going down towards the back of the knee, that can kind of help you feel that position that I want you in for this stretch. Another way to think of it is think of your hips like a bucket of water. And so instead of having water dumping out the front, we want to scoop under so water is dumping more out the back. And then from there, we want to get that rib cage, instead of flaring up here, to get right on top of here. So the best way to set that rib position is to get a big exhale. Deep breath in, and then blow all that air out. And now that rib cage is here, hips are here, and they can be stacked right on top of each other so that hip flexor can actually stretch. So once we're in that good hip flexor stretch position, now we're gonna create some tension here. So we're gonna feel like this knee has a shovel on the front of it, and that shovel's digging down and forward. So you're gonna feel like you're trying to do this. Because the ground's in the way, that knee's not actually gonna move, but you're gonna feel like you're driving as hard as you can towards that wall in front of you. So you should feel a lot of activation through the front when you do that. And then you're gonna feel like that shovel's now digging down and back. So you're driving the knee and the foot down and back towards the wall behind you, almost like a bridge feeling if you've done one of those in the past. And you should feel a lot more activation through the glutes. So you're gonna dig that knee down and forward, drive that knee down and back. I like to use something like a stick here to create a little bit of tension and control through the core. So we're going to drive this stick through the ground, dig that knee down and forward, dig that knee down and back. It doesn't look like a lot, but you should be working pretty hard at this exercise. This exercise is focused on improving hip flexion, and you're going to get a little bonus hamstring stretch here as well. So I'm going to use a box in this example. I'm going to put my foot up on this box, and I have that leg pretty straight, but I want to keep a little bend in this knee. So soft through the knee, I'm not going to have that totally locked out. I'm going to flex that toe back towards me, and then I want to stick my butt towards the wall behind me. So I should feel a big stretch of the hamstring when I do this. And again, I want that straight line through the spine, so I'm not collapsing down here to get into the stretch. Think of yourself as a seesaw from head to hip. So as hips go back, chest comes forward, and I'm getting that big stretch of the hamstring. This can be a challenging balance exercise, so I want to make sure you feel stable in this. So I like to use something for support. In this example, I'm going to use a stick. If you stand next to a wall, you could use the wall for support, but something that you feel stable and balanced in this process. So once you find that stretch, again, we're going to try to strengthen up around that end range of the stretch. So I want you to start by pushing down to the box. You're going to feel like you're trying to drive that box through the ground. As I push down, I should feel a lot of the muscles through the back of my leg light up here. And then after that, I'm going to try to lift that foot off the box. Because of the position I'm in, it's not actually going to lift, but I'm going to feel like I'm trying to as hard as I can. I should feel this a lot through that hip here. So as I start lifting up here, I feel like I pull my belly button down towards the toe and stick my butt back towards the wall behind me. So I'm now deeper into this stretch. This is my new starting point. And I want to push down again. So I'm driving that box through the ground as hard as I can. And then I'm trying to lift that foot off the box as I pull myself deeper and deeper into this stretch. I'm going to do 5 of those on the left side, and then I'll switch and do the same thing on the right side. Try these hip mobility exercises for yourself and let us know what you think. If you want to see more exercise tips or sports drills, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel below so you don't miss anything. We'll see you next time.